Snow fell like pieces of forgotten dreams over the small mountain town of Ridgecrest. The streets had emptied hours ago when the weather station warned everyone to stay inside. Shops closed early. Families gathered around warm fires. The whole world seemed to hide from the bitter cold that swept down from the peaks, but not everyone had a place to hide. Under the old railway bridge at the edge of town, a man named Daniel Reed sat wrapped in 3 layers of torn blankets. He was 58 years old, though he looked much older. 7 years of living on the streets had carved deep lines into his face. His beard was long and gray, and his hands were rough from countless cold nights, just like this one. Daniel had once been a soldier. He had served his country for 20 years. He had a wife once and a small house with a garden. But life has a way of taking things away piece by piece. His wife died of cancer. His mind could not handle the grief. He lost his job, then his house, then his place in the world. Now he owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a small bag of belongings. Tonight, the wind howled like a wounded animal. Daniel pulled his blankets tighter and watched his breath turn to mist in the freezing air. He had saved a small piece of bread from yesterday, and he broke in half. A stray cat had been visiting him for weeks now. She was thin and orange, with one missing ear. Daniel waited for her to appear. She came through the snow a few minutes later, meowing softly. Daniel smiled and held out the bread. The cat ate quickly, then curled up against his leg for warmth. He stroked her fur gently. "Cold night," he said to her, "but we will make it. We always do." The blizzard grew stronger as the hours passed. Daniel tried to sleep, but the cold made it difficult. He drifted in and out of strange dreams filled with lights and shadows. At some point during the night, he heard a sound that did not belong to the storm. That it was a heavy thud, followed by a scraping noise, like something large dragging itself across the snow. Daniel opened his eyes and looked out from under the bridge. The snow was falling so thick that he could barely see 20 feet ahead. But something was moving out there, something big. His first thought was that it must be a bear. Sometimes bears came down from the mountains in harsh winters. But this shape was wrong. It was too long, too angular, and it seemed to glow faintly, a soft blue light that pulsed like a dying heartbeat. The creature collapsed in the snow about 30 feet from the bridge. Daniel did not move at first. He was afraid, of course. Any sane person would be afraid. But then he heard something that changed everything. A voice spoke directly inside his mind. It was weak and filled with pain. "Please, help me." He shook his head, thinking the cold had finally driven him mad. But the voice came again, softer this time. "I know you can hear me. Please, I am dying." Daniel stood up slowly. The orange cat hissed and ran into the darkness. He walked through the snow toward the fallen shape, his heart pounding in his chest. Each step brought the creature into clearer view. It was covered in scales that shimmered between silver and pale blue. It had 4 legs, a long tail, and a pair of wings that lay broken against its sides. Its head was elegant and angular, with eyes that glowed like stars. It looked like a dragon from the old stories his grandmother used to tell him when he was a child. The dragon's body was covered in wounds, strange burns that glowed purple at the edges, as if the injuries existed in a place beyond normal sight. Blood that looked like liquid mercury dripped onto the snow. "What are you?" Daniel whispered. "I am called Aurelia," the voice said in his mind. "I am from very far away. I crashed here while running from hunters. I meant no harm to your world. Please, if you have any kindness in your heart, help me survive this night." Daniel looked at the wounded creature. Every logical part of his brain told him to run. This was not his problem. He had enough trouble keeping himself alive without adding a mythical beast to his worries. But then he saw the fear in those glowing eyes. It was the same fear he had seen in soldiers dying on foreign battlefields. The same fear he had seen in his wife's eyes during her final days. It was the fear of being alone at the end. Daniel Reed had lost everything in his life. His home, his family, his place in society. But he had never lost the one thing that made him human. He still knew how to care. "Come on," he said quietly. "I have a spot under the bridge. It is not much, but it is dry. I will help you." He grabbed the dragon's front leg and began to pull. Aurelia was heavy, far heavier than she looked. But Daniel was stubborn. He pulled and dragged and struggled through the snow until they reached the shelter of the bridge. He covered the dragon with his blankets and built a small fire from scraps of wood he had collected. The heat was weak, but it was something. He sat down beside the creature and placed his hand on her neck. "Rest now," he said. "You are safe." Aurelia's eyes closed slowly. Her breathing became steady. Outside, the blizzard raged on. But under that old railway bridge, a homeless man and a dragon from the stars shared warmth against the cold. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night would change the fate of the entire galaxy. 3 candles burned in glass jars that Daniel had collected from trash bins over the years. Their weak flames danced in the cold wind, casting long shadows across the stone walls of the railway bridge. The fire he had built was small, but it pushed back the worst of the winter chill. Aurelia lay curled against the far wall, her silver blue scales reflecting the firelight like tiny mirrors. Her breathing was shallow, and her wounds still glowed with that strange purple light. Daniel had done what he could. He had cleaned the injuries with melted snow and wrapped them with strips torn from his spare shirt. It was not proper medical care, but it was all he had to offer. He sat beside her through the long hours of the night, feeding the fire and watching for any change. The storm outside showed no sign of stopping. Wind screamed through the valley like an angry spirit, and snow piled up at the edges of their shelter. Near dawn, Aurelia's eyes opened. They were the color of distant galaxies, swirling with light that seemed to come from somewhere far deeper than her body. "You stayed," she said, her voice appearing directly in his mind. "Where else would I go?" Dana replied. He offered her a small cup of water that he had warmed over the fire. "Drink this. You lost a lot of blood." The dragon lowered her head and drank slowly. When she finished, she looked at him with something close to wonder. "I have traveled across 1,000 star systems," Aurelia said. "I have seen wonders that would make your poets weep with joy. But never have I met a creature who gave warmth to a stranger without asking for something in return." Daniel shrugged. "You were hurt. You needed help. That is reason enough. On most worlds, that is not reason enough. On most worlds, beings like me are hunted for our scales, our blood, our essence. We are valuable commodities. We are not seen as living things worthy of compassion. Sounds like a cold universe out there, colder than you can imagine." Aurelia rested her head on her front legs and looked into the fire. The flames reflected in her eyes, mixing with the starlight that already lived there. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You deserve to know what you have taken into your shelter." Daniel listened as Aurelia told him her story. She was a draconid, one of an ancient species that had sailed between stars for millions of years. Her people were scholars and keepers of history. They remembered things that other species had long forgotten. They carried the knowledge of civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth's sun even existed, but the draconids had enemies. A species called the Void Collective had been hunting them for thousands of years. The Collective were beings of pure darkness, creatures that existed between dimensions. They fed on the life essence of other beings, and draconid essence was the most powerful fuel they had ever discovered. They attacked our convoy near the edge of this solar system, Aurelia explained. "My ship was damaged. I managed to escape into hyperspace, but the wounds I carry are from void weapons. They burn in ways that normal fire cannot heal. Can you recover from them?" Daniel asked. "With time and rest, yes. Draconids are resilient, but the Void Hunters will not give up easily. They will track me here. They will come for me." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "How long do we have?" "Perhaps a day. Perhaps 2. Their sensors are not perfect, especially in a storm like this one. But they will find me eventually. Then you need to leave as soon as you can fly." Aurelia shook her head slowly. "I cannot fly yet. My wings are too damaged. It will be at least 3 days before I can lift myself from the ground." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He thought about what this meant. Strange creatures from space were coming to this small mountain town. They were coming to hunt down a wounded dragon who had done nothing wrong except exist. And Daniel was the only thing standing between them. He should have been terrified. He should have walked away right then and found somewhere else to hide until this cosmic trouble passed by. That would have been the smart thing to do, but Daniel Reed had stopped being smart a long time ago. He had also stopped being a coward. Then we will wait, he said finally. And if they come, we will deal with them together. Aurelia stared at him with those galaxy eyes. You do not understand. The Void Collective has destroyed entire fleets. They have brought down civilizations. You are one human with no weapons and no technology. What did you possibly do against them? Daniel smiled, and there was something old and hard in that smile. Something that came from years of surviving when the world wanted him dead. I have been fighting losing battles my whole life, he said. In the desert, in the streets, in my own head. One more losing battle does not scare me. Besides, I made you a promise. I said you were safe here, and I do not break my promises. The dragon was silent for a very long time. When she finally spoke, her mental voice was thick with emotion. In 10,000 years of traveling the stars, no being has ever protected a draconid without expecting payment. You are the strangest creature I have ever met, Daniel Reed. I get that a lot, he said. Outside, the storm continued its fury. Inside, a homeless man and an alien dragon sat together by a dying fire, preparing for a war neither of them fully understood. But for the first time in many years, Daniel did not feel alone. 2 days passed under the railway bridge. The blizzard finally began to weaken on the second night, leaving behind a world buried in white silence. Daniel had ventured out twice to find food, returning with stale bread from a dumpster behind the bakery and some frozen vegetables that a grocery store had thrown away. He shared everything with Aurelia. The dragon ate little, but she seemed grateful for every bite. Her wounds were healing faster than Daniel had expected. The purple glow had faded to a dull shimmer, and she could move without wincing now. But her wings were still too weak for flight. They talked for hours during those 2 days. Aurelia told him about distant worlds with purple skies and oceans made of liquid light. She described cities that floated among clouds and forests that sang in languages older than time. Daniel listened like a child hearing bedtime stories, his eyes wide with wonder. In return, he told her about Earth, about mountains and rivers, about music and art, about the kindness of strangers and the cruelty of systems that let good people fall through the cracks. Aurelia seemed fascinated by all of it, but especially by the stories of human compassion. Your species is a contradiction, she said. You build weapons capable of destroying your own world, yet you also run into burning buildings to save strangers. You fight wars over imaginary lines on maps, yet you weep when you see a child suffering on the other side of those lines. I have studied many species. None of them are as divided within themselves as humans. Daniel laughed softly. We are a mess. Always have been. But we try to be better. At least some of us do. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden change in the air. Daniel felt it before he understood it. A pressure against his skin, like the world was holding its breath. The fire flickered and died without warning. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on the stone walls. Aurelia lifted her head, her eyes blazing with alarm. They are here. Daniel grabbed an old metal pipe he had kept for protection and moved to the edge of the bridge. He looked out into the snowy night and saw 3 figures walking toward them across the frozen field. They were tall and thin, perhaps 8 feet high. Their bodies seemed to be made of shadow itself, constantly shifting and moving like smoke caught in a bottle. They had no faces, only empty darkness where features should be. Cold radiated from them like heat from a furnace, but in reverse. They pulled warmth out of the world around them. The Void Collective had arrived. Daniel stepped out from under the bridge and raised his pipe. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, but his hands did not shake. He had faced death before. He would face it again. That is far enough, he said. The 3 hunters stopped about 20 feet away. One of them tilted its head, as if confused by the small creature blocking its path. Human, it said. The voice was like ice cracking in a frozen lake. You are interfering with collective business. Move aside. There is no business here. Just a man trying to stay warm. You should look somewhere else. We sense the draconid. Her essence calls to us. She is hidden nearby. Give her to us, and you'll be allowed to live." Daniel shook his head. "I do not know what you're talking about. There is nothing here but snow and rocks." The lead hunter moved closer. The cold that came with it was unbearable. Daniel's breath turned to ice crystals the moment it left his lips. His fingers began to go numb around the pipe. "Your deception is meaningless. We will take what we came for." But as the creature tried to pass Daniel, something strange happened. It stopped suddenly, as if it had walked into an invisible wall. The hunter looked down at Daniel with what might have been surprise. "What is this?" it whispered. Daniel did not understand what was happening either, but he held his ground. He thought about Aurelia behind him, wounded and afraid. He thought about his promise to keep her safe. He thought about every person who had ever shown him kindness when he had nothing to offer in return. Heat began to build in his chest. Not physical heat, but something deeper. Something that felt like sunlight in summer days and the warmth of being held by someone who loved you. The hunter recoiled. "Impossible. He carries the spark." "What spark?" another hunter asked. "The old light. The kindler flame. It burns." The lead hunter stepped back, smoke rising from its shadowy form. "This world is protected. We must report to the collective." In an instant, all three figures dissolved into darkness and vanished. Daniel stood alone in the snow, his pipe still raised, his whole body trembling. He had no idea what had just happened, but somehow, impossibly, he had driven them away. When he returned to the bridge, Aurelia was staring at him with an expression he could not read. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." "I do not know what I did." They said something about a spark. "What does that mean?" Aurelia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper in his mind. "It means everything I was taught about humans was wrong, and everything is about to change." The fire crackled softly as Daniel added more wood to keep it alive. His hands were still shaking from the encounter with the Void Hunters, but his mind was racing with questions. He sat down across from Aurelia and waited for her to explain what had just happened. The dragon took a long breath before she began. "What I'm about to tell you is one of the oldest secrets in the galaxy," she said. "The Draconids have kept this knowledge hidden for millions of years. We swore never to share it with any other species. But after what I just witnessed, I believe you have a right to know." Daniel nodded slowly. "I am listening. Long ago, before the first stars were even born, there existed a species called the First Kindlers. They were the original consciousness in the universe. When everything else was cold and dark, the Kindlers discovered how to create warmth. Not just physical warmth, but something deeper. They found a way to generate compassion, empathy, love. They called this energy the spark." Aurelia's eyes grew distant, as if she was looking back through endless ages of time. The Kindlers understood that the universe tends toward coldness and isolation. Left alone, all life eventually becomes selfish and cruel. So they made it their mission to spread this spark throughout existence. They seeded it into the DNA of promising species across thousands of galaxies. Then they vanished, leaving no trace of where they went or why. "What does this have to do with me?" Daniel asked. "Most species lost the spark over time. Evolution favored strength and aggression. Logic and survival became more important than kindness. The galaxy grew colder with each passing era. Empires rose and fell, all of them built on conquest and exploitation. The memory of the Kindlers faded into myth." Aurelia fixed her galaxy eyes on Daniel's face. "But your species is different. Humans retain the spark. Somehow, against all odds, the flame the Kindlers planted in your ancestors never went out. It is why you feel guilt when you hurt others. It is why you cry at sad stories. It is why you give your last piece of bread to a starving cat, even when you yourself are hungry." Daniel thought about his life, all the choices he had made, the times he had helped strangers when it would have been easier to walk away, the way his heart ached when he saw suffering, even the suffering of people he did not know. "I always thought that was weakness," he said quietly. "The world punishes people who care too much. The world, you know, punishes it, yes. But in the greater universe, the spark is the rarest and most precious thing that exists. Species have searched for it for millions of years. The Void Collective destroys worlds looking for traces of it. And here you are, a single human with nothing to his name, carrying more of the spark than entire civilizations combined. Daniel let out a slow breath. It was too much to process. He was nobody, a homeless veteran living under a bridge. How could he possibly be important to the entire galaxy? Why is my spark so strong? He asked. There are billions of humans. Surely some of them are kinder than me. The spark grows strongest in those who suffer but choose compassion anyway, Aurelia explained. It is easy to be kind when life is good, but to lose everything and still open your heart to a wounded stranger, that requires a depth of soul that most beings never develop. Your suffering did not break you, Daniel. It purified you. It made your spark burn brighter than any I have ever sensed. Silence fell between them. The fire popped and sent sparks floating toward the stone ceiling. Outside, the wind had finally calmed. The storm was over. The Draconids have been watching Earth for centuries, Aurelia continued. We believe humans might be the ones the prophecies spoke of, the inheritors of the Kindlers, the species that would bring warmth back to a frozen universe. But we never made contact because we were not certain. And now I'm certain. What you did tonight should have been impossible. The Void Collective has never been driven back by a single being, but your spark burned them. Your compassion became a weapon against creatures of pure darkness. Daniel looked down at his rough, weathered hands. They did not look like the hands of a hero. They looked like the hands of a man who had been beaten by life and had barely survived. I do not feel like a savior, he said. Aurelia leaned forward and touched her scaled nose gently to his forehead. Warmth spread through him, chasing away the last of the cold. The greatest heroes never do, she said. That is what makes them great. They do not seek glory or recognition. They simply do what is right because their hearts give them no other choice. Daniel closed his eyes and let the truth sink in. He had spent 7 years believing he was worthless, believing that society had thrown him away because he had no value. But all along, he had been carrying something precious inside him, something the universe desperately needed. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel felt like he mattered. But the night was not over yet. The Void Collective would return, and next time, they would bring more than 3 hunters. Morning light filtered through the clouds, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and pale blue. It was the first clear sky Daniel had seen in days, but he could not enjoy it. Deep in his gut, he knew the peace would not last. Aurelia felt it too. She had been restless since dawn, her wings twitching as she tested their strength. They were healing but not fast enough. She still could not fly. They are coming, she said around midday. I can sense them gathering beyond the mountains. Many more than before. Daniel stood at the edge of the bridge and looked out at the quiet town below. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few people walked along the main street, going about their normal lives. They had no idea what was approaching. How many, he asked. Dozens. Perhaps more. The collective does not tolerate failure. They will send enough hunters to overwhelm any resistance. Daniel thought about running. They could flee into the mountains and try to hide, but he knew it would only delay the inevitable. The Void would track Aurelia wherever she went, and if they came in force, they might destroy the whole town just to find her. Running was not the answer. We make our stand here, Daniel said. Right here, under this bridge. If I could push back 3 of them, maybe I can push back more. Aurelia looked at him with worried eyes. The spark is powerful, but you are still mortal. There is a limit to how much you can channel before it consumes you. Then I will push that limit as far as it goes. They waited as the sun crossed the sky. Daniel ate the last of his bread and drank water from a stream that ran beneath the bridge. He thought about his life, all the good moments and all the bad ones. The faces of people he had loved and lost. The small kindnesses that had kept him alive when everything else had failed. The temperature began to drop as the afternoon faded. Shadows grew longer. And then, as the sun touched the western peaks, the Void Collective arrived. They came from every direction. Dozens of shadow figures emerging from the tree line, rising from the snow, stepping out of darkness itself. They surrounded the railway bridge in a perfect circle. Their empty faces turned toward Daniel and Aurelia. Point one of them stepped forward. It was larger than the others, nearly 10 feet tall, and the darkness around it was deeper, heavier. This was their leader. Human, it said in a voice like grinding glaciers. You have interfered with the collective twice now. We have come to correct that mistake. Surrender the Draconid, and your death will be painless. Daniel stepped out to face them. His metal pipe hung at his side, useless against such creatures. But he held himself straight and met the leader's empty gaze without flinching. I told your scouts the same thing, I will tell you. She is under my protection. You cannot have her. You are one being. We are Legion. Your spark cannot burn us all. Maybe not, Daniel admitted. But I'm going to try. He closed his eyes and reached deep inside himself. He thought about the shelter worker named Grace who had given him a warm meal on his first homeless night. He thought about the little girl who had handed him a chocolate bar on Christmas Eve, her small face full of innocent kindness. He thought about his wife, the way she used to hold his hand during thunderstorms because she knew he was afraid of the noise. The spark ignited in his chest and spread outward like a sunrise. Warmth radiated from Daniel in waves. It was not physical heat, but something purer, something that touched the soul rather than the skin. The closest hunters screamed and staggered backward, smoke pouring from their shadowy forms. Impossible, the leader hissed. One human cannot contain this much light. But Daniel kept pushing. He remembered every act of kindness he had ever witnessed. Strangers helping strangers. Soldiers carrying wounded enemies to safety. Mothers sacrificing everything for their children. The spark grew brighter with each memory, fueled by the collective compassion of the entire human race. The circle of hunters began to collapse. One by one, they dissolved into nothingness, unable to withstand the warmth. The leader tried to advance, but the light drove it back. This world is protected, Daniel said. His voice was calm despite the power flowing through him. Not by weapons, not by technology, but by something you could never understand. By kindness, by love, by the simple belief that every life matters. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, they blazed like twin suns. Go back to your masters. Tell them what you found here. Tell them that Earth is a world of kindlers. And if they ever threaten us again, we will burn them out of existence. The leader stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, it vanished. The remaining hunters fled after it, disappearing into the shadows from which they had come. Daniel collapsed to his knees, exhausted. The spark faded, leaving him drained but alive. Behind him, Aurelia limped forward and curled around him protectively. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. You drove back the entire collective. Daniel laughed weakly. Remind me never to do that again. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. 5 days after the battle, the sun rose over Ridgecrest in a sky so clear it seemed made of crystal. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown earth and sleeping grass. Spring was coming early this year, as if the land itself was celebrating what had happened. Under the railway bridge, Daniel sat beside a small fire, watching Aurelia test her wings. She stretched them wide, each one spanning nearly 30 feet. The membranes had healed completely, thin and strong as silk. She flapped them gently, stirring up dust and dried leaves. They are ready, she said, folding them back against her body. I can fly again. Daniel felt a strange mix of happiness and sadness. He had known this moment would come. Aurelia did not belong on Earth. She had a life among the stars, duties and responsibilities that stretched across galaxies. Their time together had always been temporary. I am glad, he said. You should get back to your people. Tell them what happened here. Aurelia walked over and sat down beside him, her long tail curling around the fire. Her galaxy eyes studied his face with deep affection. Come with me, she said softly. Daniel blinked. What? Come with me to the stars. I can take you aboard my ship once I signal for pickup. You could see the wonders I told you about. Purple skies, singing forests, cities of light floating among the clouds. Your spark is strong, Daniel. The Draconid Council would welcome you. You would never be homeless again. For a long moment, Daniel let himself imagine it. Flying through space on a dragon's back, walking on alien worlds, meeting species that humanity had never dreamed of. It was everything he had secretly wished for during those long, lonely nights under the bridge. But then he thought about the people of Ridgecrest, the shelter workers who never stopped trying to help, the baker who left day-old bread by the dumpster where he could find it, the children who waved at him even when their parents pulled them away. Ordinary people carrying their own small sparks, doing their best to make the world a little warmer. I cannot, Daniel said finally. I belong here. Aurelia tilted her head. You have nothing here. No home, no family, no place in society. Why would you stay? Daniel smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Because this is where the work needs to be done. You said humans are the inheritors of the kindlers, that our compassion could heal a frozen universe. But how can we do that if we cannot even heal ourselves? He looked out at the town below, its small houses and quiet streets. There are others like me out there, people who have been forgotten, people who have been thrown away. But inside them, the spark still burns. I want to find them. I want to remind them that they matter, that their kindness is not weakness, that even when the world treats them like garbage, they are still carrying something precious. Aurelia was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her mental voice was thick with emotion. You continue to surprise me, Daniel Reed. Any other being would have jumped at the chance to escape their suffering. But you choose to stay and face it, to make it better. That is the most human thing I have ever witnessed. She reached beneath her wing and carefully pulled loose a single scale. It was about the size of his palm, silver and blue, warm to the touch. She placed it in his hands. Keep this with you always, she said. It will never lose its warmth. When the nights grow cold and the world seems cruel, hold it and remember that somewhere in the stars, a dragon is thinking of you. Daniel clutched the scale to his chest. It pulsed with gentle heat like a second heartbeat. Thank you, he said, for everything. Aurelia pressed her forehead against his one last time. Then she stepped back and spread her magnificent wings. I will return, she promised, and I will tell the council what I found here. When humanity is ready to join the galactic community, the Draconids will be waiting to welcome you. She leaped into the sky with a powerful thrust, her wings catching the morning wind. Daniel watched her rise higher and higher until she was just a silver speck against the blue. Then a flash of light, and she was gone. He stood alone under the railway bridge, holding the warm scale against his heart. But he did not feel lonely anymore. Daniel gathered his few belongings and walked into town. The sun was warm on his face, and the streets were coming alive with morning activity. He passed a young woman struggling to carry heavy grocery bags through the melting snow. Without thinking, he stepped forward. Let me help you with those, he said. She looked at him with surprise at first, taking in his worn clothes and weathered face. But then she smiled. Thank you so much. I live just down the street. No problem, Daniel said, taking the bags. That is what we are here for, to help each other. As they walked together, Daniel felt the spark glow gently in his chest. One small act of kindness, one tiny flame passed from soul to soul. This was how you change the universe. Not with weapons, not with technology, but with warmth shared freely, one person at a time. The galaxy's long winter was ending, and it started right here on a quiet street in a small mountain town with a homeless man carrying groceries for a stranger.